This is how I mark out the placket. Is I get the first long line like that, and then I use the measuring guide to measure out the fold lines, and it also helps me to understand actually the construction of all of this. So I do the first line at 0.5, and then I move across 2.5, etc., etc., and understanding what's fold, what's cut. But I will keep going with this tutorial to make it a little bit less scary. When you're marking out the depth of the opening, it's got here the deepest one of the opening, and it's measuring at approximately 19.5 centimeters. It'll probably, no, it'll go down to around about 20. That's decent. I quite like a lower opening, but I get that some people don't like it quite so low, and because I haven't put buttons on this, but of course you can put buttons on this placket if you want to. But if you want to make that slightly shorter, then this is arbitrary. The length of this line is up to you, but you just need to move everything else up. So say you wanted it to finish at 17, so you're taking off 3 centimeters off that depth, then you just need to move this line up 3 centimeters and this bottom line up 3 centimeters as well. And that will mean that the opening of the front placket is not quite as deep. So once I've got all of this marked out and I'm happy with the depth of the opening, I've got the fold lines marked, I've got a nice square top across there, then I would use a rotary cutter to cut out the outside of the placket. And you'll notice here that it's got the interfacing. I've block fused it, so the right side's there, the wrong side, to give some stability to the placket. I'm just going to go ahead and cut out the outside lines. I'm ready to press all my lines. So now that you've folded in and you've pressed in your fold lines so that everything is nice and neat on the inside of the placket, and you've measured and you've decided how long, how deep you want that opening, you've got the wrong side of the front with the wrong side of the placket facing up, and I just like to match, or you need to, I like to, I always crease through to the center front, and I know that that is the center line there, that's my cut line. So that gets matched up there, and I just make sure that these points here have reached the top of the neck, because I'm going to trim these off when I finish. I'm checking that that line is matching my center front. Once that is in place, based on the diagram here, this is my cut line and this is my stitch line around here. So I'm going to go ahead and pin through the stitch line. And just a note on the pin heads, I mean, everyone has their own way, but I like to think about that I'm going to start here so I can pull the pin heads out that way, and then I'm going to pivot across here, and then I can pull the pin heads out that way. I've been working with some teenage students, and they often get into trouble when the pin heads are going the wrong way. So that stitch line has been stitched, and now we need to cut through. I like to use really sharp scissors. Just make sure that you're only cutting what you want to cut, and just go through that center line. Make sure you get right into that corner, but not beyond the stitching. And we're going to take it to the ironing board and press this through to the front. Okay, so this is where, for me, the placket gets a bit confusing and hectic, but you've just pressed it, haven't done anything else, and it almost sort of falls into where it's meant to be. The fold line that you did initially just covers that stitch line beautifully. So this is the shorter tab. So I just do one step at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and pin, because I want to secure down this edge. So if you are choosing to not do the top stitching on the placket, the top stitching has no construction reason. It's just a aesthetic feature. I really like it, but it is an extra step. So if you're just going to do the placket, if you've, like, this is the first time you've done it, then maybe you just do this step. So we need to stitch 2-3 mils from the edge of that fold line right down to the bottom there. If you're going to go ahead and do the top stitching, then you're just running parallel lines all the way to the edge. It's about 5 that you can fit, but that depends on how dense you want the top stitching to be. I like to do, I think it's 5, maybe 6, 5, I think, sort of 3 mil apart, but it's very arbitrary and your design decision. Okay, so if you're top stitching and you'll get down to here and you've sewn right down to the bottom, you then want to flip out this tab, the top out to the left, so you're only top stitching on this short placket edge. And then you just continue doing parallel lines, working out your spacing. Okay, so if you've top stitched, this is what you'll end up with. And if you haven't top stitched, you'll end up with just the 1 row of stitching. The 1 row of stitching will capture the bottom bit, but not the rest of it. And the inside will be neat there. So now it's time to do the long tab. And again, because you've kind of got the fold lines already done, it will fall into place. This folded edge will sit just beyond that stitch line, and then that will fold over that, and that will be beautiful. We'll go ahead and top stitch down the edge here first. When you're pinning this long tab, when we did the first one, we sewed all the way down to the bottom. And this one, you're going to only sew the first row of stitching to where you've clipped in, right at that point there. So find that point and pop a pin in. Make sure everything's sitting nice and flat. If it's a bit crinkled here, it might be that you haven't quite cut into the corners properly. So that is the lowest point that we're going to do this first kind of edge seam down, and you're only obviously pinning and sewing this section here. So again, it's covering up that stitch line with the folded edge, and you're just going to sew down to where the opening is. So you're going to sew down to that point there. If you're choosing to top stitch, we need to get this tab free. So you're just top stitching for decorative purposes. Everything is free underneath. You're only sewing this tab here, parallel lines. I would start on this edge only because it's the way my machine goes in, and I would marry it up with that one, just knowing your spacing so that all of the spacing's equal. So you've got your 2 plackets, the short and the long. you've either got one row of stitching to secure that down there and one row there, or you've done the top stitching, and it's like magic. Hopefully the short one tucks under the long one like that. So that is it from the front, and from the back it should be really neat because that's been your cut line there. And we now just need to secure that in place, and we also need to neaten off the bottom here. So you can really make whatever shape you like at the bottom. I'm going to just square it off, so you can press it or you can just finger press it. That hides all of that as well. If you wanted to trim that, you could, but we're going to top stitch, so I've just made a little fold under there. And remember how we didn't continue the stitching on that first line? We're going to finish that now so that everything's neat. Just watch your corners, make sure they're neat and that everything's lining up beautifully, which by some miracle it just does. Secure that in place. And then again, you can choose, you know, the pattern that you want to do, but essentially this next step is just going to, like often you see with a cross through or one cross or just a square, and it's just to keep this down. So we just find the point where we cut, and we want to just go above, just above that. So that's going to be our parallel line just above the cut line, and we're going to secure that in place. On the instructions it gives a guide as to how you might do that, but again that's totally arbitrary as long as you secure that in place. So I'm just checking where my cut point is. I had the pin in and I'm about 1/2 centimetre above that, so I'm going to start on the open side. Pick up that stitch line and stitch all the way down, making sure that you're hiding, tucking in any bits that you don't want to see. Make sure your corners are neat. And then I'm going to go up on a diagonal to where I started. I'm going to pick up that stitch line that I did before. Again, tucking in any threads, any tabs, making sure everything's flat. And then the last bit is going to meet up and secure the bottom and meet up with the line over there. And you did it. Did a beautiful placket with top stitching. Just trim off any threads that might be out. So happy when these work. Always surprised. You can see that the top here is poking up, so we just need to trim that in line with the neckline, ready to put the collar on. And of course, if you wanted to put buttons and buttonholes, you could make that longer and put buttonholes. There's so many options once you kind of get your head around the placket. I'm really not great with spatial awareness, but I've loved working this out. So I hope that this YouTube tutorial has helped.